order. Let's do
Yeah.
it.
Okay.
Neal Beck, thank you so much for joining me today. And just a little bit of context for people who don't know you or me either. You are a supporter of So Percussion and have been for quite a while. And you're someone who I don't think I've actually met in person yet, other than this. But we've corresponded over email, and you've seen us play several times, and have always had nice words to say, and you're always emailing, and it's just been nice to connect with you over email, but now face to face finally. Can you just, before we get into sort of politics or any of the other stuff that you do, can you tell me a little bit about yourself? Like take me back to like baby Neal. What got you interested in doing what you do, and what got you interested in like weird percussion music, I guess? Like,
Oh, okay. As
how
opposed to
how did you intersect with us? Go
Oh,
back to
okay.
baby Neal.
Okay. So first, I have met you face to face at your
Pardon.
dinners.
Oh, okay, pardon me.
But obviously there were very many. It was
There
there were
was,
big events.
and that was pre-pandemic, so I've sort of blocked out
Yeah.
that
Oh
part
no,
of my
everything
life.
was yeah. As I was saying before we started, I have literally no skill in playing music. My wife will tell you that. Perhaps I like percussion because I'm particularly unmelodic, but I
Hmm.
like minimalism.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
and I was really so I won't tell you about baby Neal Beck, but I'll tell you about high school Neal Beck, where I and a bunch of us were very annoying people. So we lived in Eastern Queens, Flushing, um, back when it was still conservative Jewish. And we would go to the city every weekend night to listen to music.
Mm.
And so we would go to Columbia, to the Columbia. Columbia had a great, I don't know if it still exists, probably doesn't. Columbia, Princeton, either Computer Music Center or Experimental Music Center.
I think
So Charles,
Columbia still, I think, still has that aspect pretty
yeah.
hard, pretty
So
heavily.
Charles Wernen
Hmm.
and Harvey Solberger, who eventually ended up at UCSD.
Hmm.
So we would go there. I don't know if we knew what we were doing. And then we had this series of concerts. There was some person who wanted to paper these concerts that wouldn't fill up. So for
Hmm.
like $5 a year, you could go to any concert you wanted, many of which were modern.
Well,
So we ended up
what
doing,
can I just ask you, just as a high school Neal Beck,
yeah.
why Charles Warren? Like
Oh, because he
what?
was at Columbia. So we just went to Columbia. So we had a lot of friends who went to the Columbia. I wasn't. The Saturday morning, they had their special science things.
Hmm.
So going to Columbia was a natural. It was a long way away from Eastern Queens, but it was a natural thing to do. And I don't think we made a choice. We just said, "Oh, let's do this. It's Columbia." And we went, and we sort of liked it.
But
And
was there like a? I'm trying to like, so Charles Warren for you as a high school kid was normal, like to go
yeah,
listen to like.
yeah, yeah.
As a 42-year-old man, I still feel like listening to Charles Warren would not be a normal thing for me to do. But
Yeah,
like
probably
for
not. I
you in
haven't
high
heard
school,
much.
though, that's interesting to me.
Well, I mean, I'll tell we also screwed up a lot. So we went to a Lamont Young concert, a
Uh-huh.
string quartet, and it was one of the only ones we walked out on at the intermission.
Okay.
We were, this was super Lamont Young, one note 5 minutes, one note the next, no,
Hmm.
um, nothing else, and we couldn't figure it out. So I think we're just obnoxious people who like to do things. Anybody could like Beethoven. Also, we're all mathematical, so I like
Mm.
Bach,
Hmm.
uh, like intricate rhythms and things,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
computers, like toys, like odd sounds.
Well, it's interesting to me that, and again, like I'm basically ignorant of Charles Warren's music,
Yeah, I probably am at this point too.
other than sort of a general idea of that style of music. And I'm curious, like, you got a bunch of, there's, your background is Richard Serra sculptures, and
Yes,
you mentioned minimalism, and that's something that so does a lot of with Steve Reich and Terry Riley
of
and
course.
that sort of
Well, I love
stuff.
you guys.
But I kind of can't picture two more diametrically opposed musics than Charles Warren and Steve Reich, like, or
Oh,
so like how where did
well, I'll just give you an example
yeah, yeah.
of we just fell into this.
Hmm.
And so I'll tell you how we get to Steve Reich.
Hmm.
which is many years pass, don't do much of anything. I'm ended up at UCSD.
Mm-hmm.
You know, UCSD had great modern theater, and you of course know their music department,
Right.
which is, I think, the best modern music department in the country. You may be at NYU, I'm at NYU.
Well,
You know,
I wouldn't disagree with you in the sense that it's a great, if you're a percussionist who really wants to go and research and just buckle down and really dig into like a laboratory experience of modern music, like UCSD is the place to do it.
yeah. So again, just like with Columbia, didn't know really much what I was doing,
Mm-hmm.
but stumble over to their what their group was called Sonar,
Mm-hmm.
and again sort of liked it. And then again, just by chance, Steve Schick was there. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
nothing to do with me, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And as you know, I mean, Steve is incredible.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I guess when I really got into percussion, he did a concert. He had a group called Redfish Bluefish. You must
Mm-hmm.
know it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's still, you know, I was a student, so they must change all the time. And it was a concert, and they did two pieces. Schoenberg is a Stumi. It's a German
Stimmung?
name.
Stimmung?
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 Yeah, I think so. It was a percussion piece.
I think Stock. I'm not sure to be honest
Oh,
with
you're
you.
not up to date on your percussion
No, I
history.
told you. Well, Stimmung, I believe, is a piece by Stockhausen.
Yeah,
Uh,
Stockhausen. So he did
yeah.
that, and then he did Reich's. Was Reich's called drumming or
Mm-hmm,
something? This is
mm-hmm,
in
mm-hmm.
the late '80s or something,
Yeah.
and I just loved it.
Mm,
And Steve is just an incredible person. I mean,
mm,
incredible performer.
mm-hmm,
I
mm-hmm.
got to know him a little bit because
Yeah, yeah.
he didn't have that many groupies or that many groupies on the faculty. There, myself and a friend would go there, and then finally, when I got married again, my wife would go,
Mm-hmm,
and it was, you know, so it was great. But Steve, you know, is just an incredible person, and also I love, you know, that a great modern soprano, not Janos Stoker, who's a great double bassist. Anyway, it was super cool, super
mm.
great.
Not Edgar. It wasn't Edgar Meyer, was it?
No, he's very famous.
Okay.
He taught my wife how to cut tape in Music One. That was the kind of place UCSD was. Anyway,
Nice,
so we just
nice.
started going. And so we were at UCSD, and I was very happy. And then NYU said, you should come to NYU. And I told my wife, if a mere mortal can live in Greenwich Village, you know, without being a stockbroker, what could be better than this? And my wife said, yeah, but she's very nice. So we started looking around. We went to BAM and things. I think I must have first heard you guys. Could have been Bang on a Can Marathon.
I wouldn't be surprised if that was where we crossed paths. I mean, that's
Yeah,
where a lot of roads intersect at the Bang on a
yeah,
Can marathons. Yeah.
yeah. So we were going to Bang on a Can. I would take my family, and both my daughters would go for me for Father's Day because that's when it was until about they put their foot down and said, "Sorry, we're not doing that anymore." But it was super cool. And so I heard you guys and some other people, and we loved you. You were great. You know, and Steve Schick was also there. He brought, and one year brought his air horn and things. I'm not sure.
Well, he was one of the original members of the Bang on a Can All Stars
Right.
too. So
Yes.
like
Yeah.
he has a lot of ties in with that scene, and so.
Yeah.
Well, what were you doing? You said you were on faculty at UCSD.
Yeah.
What were you teaching there?
I was teaching political science.
Political science,
So
and then
I'm a quantitative political scientist.
and what got you into that? And
Oh,
what is quantitative political science? Pardon me for
okay.
just asking the dumb question here.
It's failed mathematicians. So I went to Rochester
Uh-huh.
to be a math major, which I was, but not a very good one. I have a degree, but my teachers did not encourage me to go on.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always liked social science.
Mm.
And I thought at the time economics, so sociology was sort of backwards at the time. I had friends who went to Columbia where sociology was more interesting, and they became sociologists, study sociology. At Rochester, political science was really fascinating, just again, sheer luck, just like Steve Schick being at UCSD. So William Riker was there. I, of course, had never heard of William Riker. He was one of the first people to do game theory in political science, so he was more theoretical.
Mm.
But he also encouraged people to do serious statistical work. So, you know, he said, take the graduate econometrics course and things. He was just great. So he's all of our fathers.
Mm.
I mean, the same way that Steve, or I don't know who the father of percussion is, but modern percussion.
There were people, yeah. I mean, Steve was definitely someone who was pushing the bound. He was at the tip of the spear for a lot of what we
Yeah,
do.
so Riker was, and so I really liked it. And Rochester was a weird kind of place where just like you could go in New York and hear Charles Warren in, or just walk in and do that. You could take PhD courses, and I was a terrible mathematician, but in political science, being a terrible math in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king, and perhaps even the half-eyed myopic man is king. So I could do that sort of stuff, and it was great. I loved it. So and then I went to Yale. I thought I'd do more, but they didn't do it. But then finally got a job at UCSD after setting a record for the longest amount of time it takes to finish a dissertation. And, I thought I was going to end the Vietnam War, but didn't do that. And the UCSD was one of the, again, brand new, so every department at UCSD is a bit like the music department. It's brand new school. I was like the 8th person hired in the department, and their mission at everything was just to be cutting edge, whatever you wanted. Sometimes that worked out. So sociology ended up being very historical and very non-quantitative. Economics had the best time series people in the world. UCSD is, builds a world-class political science department somewhere in top 10. It's very rare for a new department. And so I was doing, teaching statistics and teaching some, political economy and things, and so I like that.
Can I ask you, like, as a teacher? I mean, there's things that I don't want to assume that teaching skills in political science are that much different than teaching skills in percussion, in the sense that there's some fundamentals that every student's different. Everybody's got their own worldview. There's a couple fundamentals that I feel like, if after 4 years they study with me, if they just took away these 3 things out of the 400 I've told them, I'll be happy. When you're teaching, political science, what are some things that you really want your students, after studying with you, to take away?
Oh, well, I'll start with, on the good side, is that with when you have something that's a random sample and you have enough observations, then it's going to be normal distributive, so you can say all sorts of things about it. That's the central limit theorem. So that makes all the statistics work. Mm-hmm. When you don't have large samples, it doesn't, but we usually do. That's the good side. And then the other thing that I really want people to do, and the real innovation in not just political science, but economics, statistics, is causality. So we used to run a bunch of regressions on different countries, and you find that countries that are more this or more that. But starting in, we knew about, again, everything that's new is old. So this goes back to the 30s and so forth, and goes back to R.A. Fisher and experiments, but it sort of was less relevant, and then it became rediscovered in probably the 1990s. And so the big thing is, I guess the mantra is that correlation is not causality.
I was just going to say, I mean, that's the sort of the logical fallacy that gets thrown up a lot. I've been seeing that a lot recently.
Yeah.
And people talk about it in relation to gun violence. They talk about it in relation to gang violence or whatever, like, all these different societal issues. Yeah. Sorry, continue. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but like.
Oh, okay. So again, correlation is not causality. Mm-hmm. And then the nice thing is that's a negative. You can't do much, but actually, we've discovered lots of ways to sort of do clever causal things, and some of it's experimental. So NYU, for example, is one of the centers of doing this stuff experimentally, where you have you pay people different amounts to vote in a lab, and you see what happens. Mm-hmm. I'm not super big on that, but then there's a whole bunch of other people who are looking out in the field, and they get these sort of cool, what are called natural experiments. So I mean, just give you a simple example. People who go to charter schools are different than people who don't go to charter schools. And so you can't compare people who went to a charter school with people who didn't, because they're just different. Their parents care more. they themselves chose to go to a charter school, so it would probably work for them. They weren't put up with the discipline, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so then you get lucky. And so the other thing I tell my students to take away is everything that's bad for people is good for social science, and vice versa. So if we had enough charter schools for everybody, we couldn't do very much, but we don't.
Mm-hmm.
And so fortunately for both political reasons, that is, instead of if we just took the people who fit best over like private schools and we took the people whose parents are the pushiest or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
that wouldn't work very well. But we do it randomly. And we do that for political reasons. But it works out great. So we can compare the people who got in randomly with the people who didn't get in, assuming they went to a public school. Mm-hmm. And that gives you the causal argument, because that's just like an experiment. Mm-hmm. And there are just tons of these things in the social world.
Whenever, I mean, you use the word experiment several times, yeah. And there's a sort of I remember doing in psychology I took a psychology course at Ohio State my freshman year, and I was poor, and me and my buddy were like, we're going to volunteer for all of the experiments that the psychology department is doing. So like we went in and we had electrodes tied to our wrists, and we had to watch video, all those things. And we got $10 afterwards. And we were like, this is great. I can't believe this. Those feel like those were experiments that people were doing on me. And when you say experiment, it's not exactly like you are experimenting on. Like, what do you mean when you say experiment?
Well, so they're often called quasi experiments or natural experiments. So they're not. The control isn't there. So the experimenter is not saying you're going to get this or you're going to get that, right. Or the doctor, you get the statin, you get the placebo. But because it's randomized, assuming they're not cheating, mm-hmm. So you have to watch them, mm-hmm. The people who are choosing. So assuming they're not just taking what they think are the best people, or the people who are slipping them $100 under the table, right. Because they're the parents who are pushiest. Assuming it really is random, but that's probably, you can watch it and it's probably pretty good. It's like an experiment. So the people who get into the charter schools, again, are random. Whether you get so there's a treatment charter school or the control public school, because these people are not going to. If you're in the charter school world, you're not going to a fancy private school. Mm-hmm. You're going to a public school if you don't get in. You're poor, and so it's just like an experiment. Well, and so you can do, again, as long as you're comparing apples and apples. Mm. So as long as there's something like a randomization.
When you guys talk, can you talk a little bit about the other thing too that I liked about being in school, I took a political ethics course.
Okay, yeah.
And it was fascinating. And I'm trying to imagine taking that course now with people on Twitter. And I feel like that course just would not be able to be offered anymore. Because all we did every day, we walked in and he would just propose insane situations to us.
Okay.
And we'd have to explain.
Yeah.
Whatever. And it was really fascinating. And I'm curious, in your world, in terms of what you do, how do ethics intersect with this, and then how do you tease that out? Because I imagine there's some experiments that you'll run that the data will be true or verifiable, but the ethics that it sort of reinforces may not be what you want them to be. So how do you deal with that?
Okay. Well, first of all, I deal with what is, not what I want it to be. Well, so people are self-interested. That was the basic mantra.
I'm an artist, Neal, so everything is what I want it to be. It's not what it is.
Okay, yes, no. So we believe that people act more or less in their self-interest, and again, in specific details, they may do weird kinds of things, but by and large, to expect people, not to act in their self-interest is probably making a mistake. So, and again, sometimes you have to sort of broadly define it. And then there are all sorts of, ethical considerations. So the nice thing about these charter school experiments, I'll call them experiments, is that they are also ethical, because that's the fairest way to choose. Mm. For other kinds of things, so for example, there's a lot of work on who gets kidneys, who has renal failure.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, from an economist perspective, the most efficient way is to sell them. We don't do that, but that's the most efficient way. We used to in Civil War, there was a draft, but you could buy your way out of the draft. So basically, rich people or well-off people didn't get drafted. Even in Vietnam, before before the draft lottery, it wasn't very hard for people who had skills to get out. Just like it isn't very hard if charter schools just admitted people by, who was willing to fill out all the applications and things, or who had the longest thing, or who was willing to donate money. People can do that. So some of these things end up being fairer. So we end up, for example, then doing, so for example, go back to kidneys. So the dumb answer is sell them. That's fine. It makes a lot of sense, but it's not what we do. And it offends our sensibilities and things. However, some very clever people who won the Nobel Prize have then figured out ways to set up sort of something a bit like a market where you could sort of trade them. So I used to do kidneys one to one. You had to find somebody who matched you. And then Al Roth, who won the Nobel Prize, said, oh, wouldn't it be better if A could give a kidney to B and B could give a kidney to C, and then C could do something for A. And that's also how we do medical school, how you get a residency and things. He won the Nobel Prize for this. So again, it's a mixture of, so clever people realize you can't do certain kinds of things. Economists just like to buy and sell things. Sometimes that's wrong. And it depends on moral sensibility. Sometimes we can't do it.
Where does that, the thing, as you were talking about that, to me, it's like the economist's answer is like all at once the simplest and most prescient at this moment. It's like, we got these kidneys, let's sell them.
Yeah.
But at the end of that logical road is that's where the geneticist could say, well, if I have stem cells, I can grow kidneys, and then we could have a kidney store where nobody has to give up their kidneys, and we can sell kidneys at a low cost because now we can make kidneys.
Oh, okay.
You know what I mean? But then all of a sudden, the ethical argument there, which is what we're all dealing with right now with Roe v. Wade, is abortion gets in the middle, and how we deal with stem cells, and now all of a sudden the ethics argument gets more complicated.
Yes.
How far down that rabbit hole do you go with your students?
Okay, so until this coming fall semester, not too far at all, because I was mostly sort of trying to teach skills, teach them how to think causally, and how to read articles and how to know what they could believe or what they could not believe. I've always wanted, and I always liked, including, I don't call it ethics. I call it justice because it's a social kind of thing.
Oh, yeah.
So what ought to be done? And we designed a major in public policy. And one of the required courses was a course in justice. So I don't know if you studied like Rawls. So how can you justify inequality? So Rawls said you can justify inequality only if it benefits the least well-off people. And he set up this thing where suppose you're in what's called behind a veil of ignorance. You don't know where you're going to be. You don't know if you're going to be a rich person or a poor person. You don't know if you're going to be a peasant in India or a Silicon Valley engineer or a percussionist or a political science professor. What would you choose? And what system? And so he says, we would choose equality unless there was some other system that could actually make the less well-off better off. Now, that's very different than the economists who have this idea of efficiency, but they can't get beyond, if you can't make everybody better off, you can't tell. They don't deal very well with distribution, with inequality. And one of the amazing things that's happened is in the last 10 years, really, economists have started to recognize how to deal with inequality, and we've got this great new data, some of it from the IRS, some from other places, about how to deal with inequality. So one of my colleagues, for example, what should happen is that poor people should say, because there are more poor people than rich people in a democracy, let's increase tax rates. So let's raise the tax on the median person who's quite rich as high as possible. It doesn't happen. Tax rates are low. So a friend of mine goes out, one of my current dean actually, and they do surveys. And they find out that people actually care about things like fairness. And they think it's unfair. I think they're wrong, but that's just my view.
Yeah.
But because it's right. Why do we have such non-progressive taxes? And again, from a purely simple-minded economics perspective, since there are more poor people than rich people, if you have a simple democracy, and again, you can say, well, the rich people have lobbyists or whatever, but it turns out most people don't really think that you should tax the hell out of rich people. Maybe you should go some, but they're not that unhappy.
Sorry to interrupt, Neal. I mean, just as you were talking, like it, I have a very similar reaction about there's like justice versus fairness and all this stuff, like as it pertains to like the student loan debt relief argument. There's a part of me that absolutely is like, it's not. We need to help everybody out, right? Like everybody, like the people who are being taken advantage of with student loans or whatever, often are the lowest, or people who are like with a subprime mortgage or whatever. But then there's a part of me that's just like, you can't just forgive all that. That's not fair. Like,
absolutely.
Like, but again, like that fairness thing often gets in the way of.
So it's very important.
But it gets in the way of what I feel like on paper is what I say I am, which is like, of course, everybody. Let's relieve this debt for everybody. But then there's the other part of me that's just like, no.
Okay. So part of me, because actually, so I say in the fall. So I'm teaching a seminar, which is the same set of skills, but is a bigger view on all of these issues, including more on things like justice and fairness, including things about public opinion, sort of non-causal skills. So on the first question, on this question about student debt, is who actually owes it? That is, so we often want to design. So basically, if you have, let's suppose we should have said, we'll forgive the first 20,000. So there's administrative cost to that. Now, who is getting screwed by that? The people who owe more than that, or let's say the first 10,000. So who are they? Are they rich people? To hell with them. I mean, again, maybe or is it so costly to figure out who these people are that we're better off just forgiving it? So we always have this trade-off that there are these, the Republicans view that there are all these people on welfare who are undeserving. Going back to Ronald Reagan's welfare queen who had a Cadillac and 8 different accounts, and now who are going into the store and using food stamps to buy steak and things like that, because poor people shouldn't eat steak. Sorry, I'm ironic, and my wife tells me my students often miss my irony.
No, I know your intent. I mean, these are all arguments that I heard growing up.
On
the radio. Rush Limbaugh said it all the time. It's like those aren't new arguments.
So the question is, in some sense, how many people are actually, abusing the system? Because in statistics, one of the really important things that I like to stress, again, technically, is we can make 2 kinds of errors. We can either not do something when we should, or do something when we shouldn't. So we can have a system where everybody just gets through. We don't weed out any cheaters, and there clearly are cheaters. I mean, again, people are self-interested. I don't say there are a lot, but there clearly are. Or we can work very hard to weed out cheaters at the cost of losing a lot of non-cheaters or kicking them out. So, and that's a lot of the fights between, sort of the left and the right here. So one is the empirical question. how many people are cheating. So, for example, we have these work requirements for healthcare.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and people, but you can look at the data. So this is not my own analysis, but reading other people's analysis. So what I'm good at is finding other analyses and understanding which ones make sense. Is that very few people on various kinds of programs, in fact, they're either working just at very low wages, or they're disabled. So you can do counts, and we have this incredibly great new sets of data from the government on big surveys of people on income programs. We have the the census has the American Community Studies, which talk to like 1 million people each year. So you have lots of new data, and they make it available in a way that a normal person can sort of consume. I try to get people to where I think they're normal. That is, they can log in and work with the interface of the American Community Studies.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not something that most people are doing, but it's not hard. And I try to convince them they can do that. And then you can ask the question: is it worth it? So how many people are we weeding out? And how many people are we losing because the paperwork is too high? So when I said that everybody's rational, they're also, for example, concerned with their time. They have limited cognitive resources. So the new buzzword is the time tax.
Well, sorry, you just keep, there's like red flags going off in my head of like
Yeah.
all the things you're saying. Like within So Percussion, for example, I do our finances, or I manage our sort of budgets and reconcile checkbooks, all that stuff every month. When I first started the group, I would spend as much time as I needed to find the $4 that I couldn't find in the bank.
Yes.
And I stand by that. I learned a lot about that. Now it costs the organization $1,000 a day just to exist.
Yes.
It's not worth the organization's time for me to spend an entire day looking for $4.
Absolutely.
And so but that, Neal, that was something that dawned on me after doing that for like 6 months. Being like, why am I doing this? I'm spending $996 to find $4.
And many places don't. So I'm continually audited on my travel expenses by NYU.
Mm-hmm.
And they want proof that I spend, my credit card receipt that I spend $36.
Mm-hmm.
But I actually charged to my credit card. It didn't just show up on the bill, but I actually paid it. That I didn't somehow. Right. And, I get a letter from them. I have somebody who does this, so they have to do it. It takes me half an hour plus all of the service of,
you've lost money by justifying the $36.
Plus, they pissed me off, so I say, screw it. I'm not going to, because everything, depends upon people giving for free, right? So we all give a lot of things. Mm-hmm. And so you say, screw it. They don't, they're this kind of organization. I think my wife was once questioned. She took the subway. She was on a trip, and to save her company money, she took the subway in from the airport in Boston. Mm-hmm. You don't get a receipt on the subway. You didn't pay.
Right.
You probably, at the time, you didn't pay by credit card. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. They questioned her.
Yeah.
So not only did it waste $100, but also pissed her off.
Right. Well,
and so again, so we have a lot of things where we know, for example, that a lot of the work requirements in the South, because those are the states that are doing it, are very onerous. You have to come in each month and show that you've actually worked so many hours per week. Mm-hmm. Okay, you're pretty good at keeping that. I'm pretty good at keeping that. Other people are less good. They have less time to get in and things like that. And so they just don't do it. Mm-hmm. And, like the number of people who don't apply on their taxes, the earned income tax credit, which is an incredible program. It's the best welfare program, well, one of the best in the country. Mm-hmm. But a lot of it's hard to do. And then, of course, the government, in its wisdom, says, "Oh, we're going to audit these people because they're all cheaters, and because they're poor, they can't get very much out of them." Right? If they got everything, it would be
the cost benefit analysis is not. The cost benefit analysis of auditing someone who's
so these are things you can sort of get from numbers. And like, so again, um, on debt repayment, suppose we went from, suppose we eliminated, say, that everybody above $50,000. I said, well, they're rich. We don't really want to pay for them. Who are they, first of all?
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out that they're, because we know a lot, because again, the amount of data that's both collected and disseminated is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
That they tend to be people who went to for-profit colleges. They didn't graduate because no one graduates from a for-profit college. They have this huge amount of debt. They didn't get anything for it, and they're screwed. And they tend to be less well off, more likely people of color, and so forth and so on. So those are the people you want to screw. I don't think so.
Mm-hmm.
There are a few people, people talk about people who went to, NYU, whatever. But our average debt when people graduate is about $40,000,
Mm-hmm.
in spite of our crazy tuition, because nobody pays sticker prices.
Mm-hmm.
So again, where do you want to? Yeah, and then, so you can go through this and sort of, draw the lines and say, okay, suppose we did it at 20,000. Again, who are we screwing? Who are we unfairly benefiting?
We're using student debt here as the sort of
Just one.
the premise for how we would tease this out.
Yeah.
But this happened. It strikes me that you're training students to go into a career that eventually some of them are going to be at levels of the federal government, helping them figure out the cost benefit
Yeah, I
analysis
hope so.
of shutting down gyms and schools during a pandemic. Like somebody had to crunch those numbers, right? Like there was
Yeah.
somebody at the level of Neal Beck at the federal government being
Yeah.
like, well, let's game these scenarios out before we do this, right?
Right. They did it poorly.
Or at least
but,
I hope so. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I'm not saying they did it
But
well.
there's some very good economists who are arguing that shutting schools down didn't make much difference in terms of the pandemic,
Mm-hmm.
but had enormous costs.
Mm-hmm.
And we've learned that. So we know the cost of shutting the schools down now in terms of, just tests, just lost learning.
Mm-hmm.
We also know that there's not a lot of transmission, at least of this particular disease amongst younger people.
Right.
And so we've opened the schools back up. And we've also learned, so for example, the place we learned initially was from 1918, the
Mm-hmm.
1918 flu.
Mm-hmm.
And different places did different things. And it was, sort of primitive in terms of it wasn't like a causal experiment, a causality study. But again, we looked and said, okay, these places did better, that closed things down, and there was a small industry in those kinds of things.
How much of the data? Because we did have some data from the 1918 flu outbreak or epidemic in terms of how to deal with masking and like what quarantining, like those sort of basic levers that we have in dealing with epidemics. I feel it's kind of what were the first two levers we went back to: stay in your home and let's shut things down.
Yeah, until we got the vaccine.
Right. I'm curious how much of this data, like how long does that data stay in the social consciousness before fear takes over? Because I have a feeling, there's going to be another pandemic in another 90 or 100 years, and we're all going to be back to square one again, Neal, and everybody's going to forget about what happened in 2020.
Well, so everyone, so hopefully, so a lot of policymakers, so again, which is not the world of decision makers. So the story from 1918 was that these things actually work somewhat.
Mm-hmm.
That closing things down, and again, with very sketchy sort of evidence. And now we have more. So, people doing experiments on, different types of masks and which masks, because people get them, different people were getting different masks, mostly in poor countries and so forth. So we have, more evidence. And, some of it is feeds through. So like in terms of, economic development in poor countries, there are a lot of rich people like Bill Gates who actually want to do things where there's some evidentiary basis.
Well, how do you then, like, so let's say hypothetically you're at the level of, you're in the room with, Joe Biden and the energy secretary and all these other people, and everybody's trying to figure out this calamity that's coming your way. How do you, as someone, like, it's like me dealing with stage fright. like I have a job to do, and so I'm going to be, yeah, I'm nervous, but I've figured out ways to get through those uncontrollable, irrational emotions so I can do my
Yeah.
job. When decision makers are in the room deciding what they're going to do, how much do you have to push back against fear? Because
Okay.
data and fear are like strange bedfellows. They do not hang out well together.
So this goes back to political science.
Yeah.
So again, I said everybody is rational, sort of rational,
Mm-hmm.
close enough. That's a first approximation. And so what is it that politicians want? And so the current theory is that for elected officials, they want to be reelected.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's very hard to claim credit for something that didn't happen. I put you through all of this crap. I made you wear masks and things, and you didn't die. And that's pretty good. And as a causal person, we can say, okay, we talk about counterfactuals. What would have happened if we didn't do this? And we know that a lot more people would have died if we hadn't masks. That the initial shutting down was actually probably a reasonable thing to do. Not necessarily schools, but shutting down businesses and things. But you're a politician, and you say, look, this could have been much worse. You're a politician. You lie all the time. Why would I believe you? And we're going to impose these costs. That's the problem, like with global warming.
Mm-hmm.
So again, politicians have their incentives. They are going to have another election, 2 elections, 4 elections, unless they're presidents, and they have one more if they're, whatever. But eventually, they're going to be gone, and they're clearly going to be gone in the U.S. before the super costs are realized. Maybe for the mayor of Miami, you have to worry a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
So we know this,
or New York, for example, for that matter.
Yeah, but probably later.
Yeah.
And so the question is, how can we? So we know why they have these incentives to not act on these kinds of things. So either you have to convince people that there's some short-run benefit to doing these kinds of things, that there's green jobs, and in fact these things aren't as costly or whatever, or you have to argue about. So a lot of the arguments are how much we value the future. So again, it's this combination of technocratic things. But again, if you went to Joe Biden and say, you should use a discount rate of 1% instead of 3% in evaluating policies, and he's not a stupid person, he would say, that's not what I do. And if you said it to Donald Trump, he would say, I don't know what you're talking about. But one of the big things in terms of global warming is they changed how they evaluated policies with a bigger discount rate. That is how much the future is counted less. And it turns out for global warming, how much students do this exercise, changing from 1% to 3%. At 3%, 100 years just doesn't count. Okay. And then we're going to talk about politicians if they're worried about the next election. The discount rate, if you're president after the next election, is 100%. So again, you have to design policies that are not going to be too painful, right now. And again, that's the trick, is to sort of design policies that are not too painful and that sort of work. So again, it may be that even though, some sort of complicated means tested program, again, going back to debt relief would be better. It's just too complicated.
Well, we could install term limits for congressmen and women, like
but we know that turns out to do worse.
Does it really?
Yeah, because we did that in California. That gives them shorter term incentives. Re-election is good. No, political scientists study this all the time.
Yeah.
So various countries introduce term limits, take them off. What does that do? And politicians are more responsible when they want to get reelected.
Well, that is counterintuitive to me. And again, like I'm a political observer. You clearly have studied this a lot more than I have. And Neal, just out of respect for your time, like I
have respect for your audience.
No. This is like I don't know if you wanted to talk about politics, but this has been really
I want to talk about political science. I try not to talk about politics
Well, the word
because
political is in political science, so it's hard to tease those two separately.
well, I mean, politics is what I think is right or wrong or
Yeah.
whatever. 'Cause I don't have any particular expertise there. As I told you, in 2015, I was quite confident that Trump was a flash in the pan. And, so there are some things I know we should do.
Mm-hmm.
And like, for example, I'm going to end this here. Australia, which is my other country, because my daughter and grandchildren live there, they just lend people money to go to college. They actually fill in your taxes.
Mm.
You don't have to fill them in.
Mm-hmm.
And they say, oh, you had a loan. Your income was X. It's progressive. You're going to pay this amount. And it drives me crazy that we don't do that. And again, it's time tax. So why do I have to spend hours filling in my, copying my W-2s when the government has them?
Yeah.
And if they want to, charge somebody for going to college, it's obviously fairer to make it means tested.
Mm-hmm.
We have a few of those posts, but they're taken up like by 1% of people because we make it hard for people to do that.
Well, and if the government made it easier for us all to pay our taxes, there would be a whole industry that would fall apart, and that's called H&R Block. And
yeah, they don't want that.
Like again, like as soon as you flush out, it's like it's like being like, let's genetically engineer away the mosquito. It's like, have you talked to bats about that? Like the bats are going to be pretty bummed.
Well, Bill Gates is working on that.
Yeah, it's like, no, I know malaria sucks, but also what happens when all the bats go away? Like there's something else that's going to happen as a result.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, Neal, this has been really
great chatting with you.
Yeah.
So I love you guys.
Thank you very much. Well, the feeling is mutual, and we will. We're starting to get back out into the world again. So.
Yes, we've been to the theater a bunch. Haven't seen much music, but again, it's a trade-off. When I go to the theater, I'm taking a risk.
Yeah.
Okay. Great talking.
Thank you so much, my friend.
Bye-bye.
Stay healthy, and until next time.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Stay healthy.
You too. I hope you enjoyed that conversation. This podcast is brought to you by Liquid Drum, liquiddrum.com down in Waco, Texas. My good friend Todd Meehan runs an amazing percussion company down there. Great merch, great content. Check him out, liquiddrum.com. Also, Kyle Dunleavy, dunleavypans.com, DUNLEAVY pans.com. Kyle Dunleavy makes and builds all the steel drums that I perform and teach on in So Percussion, as well as at NYU and Princeton. He's an amazing tuner builder, just a really nice guy, very dependable. Check him out. If you are interested at all in steel pan advocacy, want to learn more about the goings-on in pan in Brooklyn, check out paninmotion.com. My good friend Kendall Williams, Jerry Guy, Trisha Guy, and Arisha John run an amazing organization called paninmotion.com. Check them out. And finally, Alejandre Mirage runs an amazing clothing apparel company in Brooklyn that is steel pan centric. You can check him out at mangochow, CHOW, clothing.com. I own a bunch of his shirts. They're amazing, very stylish, beautifully made. Check them out. mangochowclothing.com. Okay, hope you're well. Talk to you soon. Bye.